Chapter 261. His voice was smooth, hypnotic, but there was steel beneath it. A certainty that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age, someone who had walked the earth for such a brief time. Ouroboros will reach the absolute zenith of all guilds. He continued, each word falling like a hammer on an anvil, shaping something new, something dangerous. The peak of the world itself. Give me your blood and sweat, and I will reward you with vengeance. His expression darkened, shadows gathering around him like loyal servants, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. A glimpse of something vast and hungry that lived behind the human mask he wore. Because when I needed it, he murmured, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. No one extended a hand to me. Before I could respond, before I could even process the weight of his words, the sharp, metallic scent of blood hit my nostrils, stronger than before, overwhelming, coated my tongue, filled my lungs, made me want to gag. Arthur's expression darkened as he rose to his feet, the easy confidence in his posture never wavering, but something in his eyes changed, hardened, focused, like a blade being drawn. My breath, however, hitched, caught on the edge of a silent scream. I felt it. Not just the presence, not just the mana, something deeper. A sensation that slithered through my body, clawing at the edges of my mind, digging up something I had long since buried beneath layers of denial and forced forgetfulness. Fear. Not the everyday fear of pain or failure. No, this was something older, something primal. The kind of fear that didn't just shake your hands or quicken your pulse, but unmade you, cell by cell, memory by memory, until there was nothing left but the animal need to escape, to run, to hide. My nerves twisted, my muscles clenched, my very soul recoiled, trying to retreat from the physical confines of my body. And I knew what it was. Blood magic. A foul, ancient power, vampiric in nature, honed to perfection over countless sacrifices. And it was coming from him, radiating outward in pulsing waves that seemed to distort the very air. Bishop Vale stood there, his aura thick with it, suffocating wrong, like breathing in shards of glass. His presence alone seemed to lower the temperature in the room, frost forming at the edges of my vision. You are dangerous, the bishop mused, his gaze settling on Arthur, assessing, calculating the value of the life before him. To use Carrie like that, to outmaneuver me while my attention was elsewhere. Dangerous. Dangerous. Each repetition of the word sent another spike of dread through me. Another reminder that we were trapped here with a monster wearing human skin. Then his eyes narrowed slightly, predatory. However, a part of your plan failed, didn't it? The question hung in the air, edged with malice, with the promise of retribution. Arthur tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable, a perfect mask. Perhaps. Then, without hesitation, without warning, he placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch sending a jolt through me. And just like that, the fear lessened. Not gone. Not entirely erased. But dulled, quieted. As if someone had stepped between me and the monster in the dark. As if a shield had been raised between my mind and the creeping horror that threatened to consume it. My breath slowed. My body steadied. The room came back into focus, edges sharpening, colors brightening. Even now, he was helping me. How? How was that possible? The question echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my skull, demanding an answer I couldn't provide. You truly are remarkable, the bishop continued, watching Arthur like a scholar studying a rare specimen, like a butcher appraising meat. Your mind, your schemes, your understanding of the game, impeccable. Then his lips curled, revealing a flash of teeth too sharp, too numerous to be entirely human. But your strength is lacking. Did you honestly think you could defeat me alone? Arthur exhaled, a soft sound that somehow carried more weight than it should have, shaking his head as if disappointed by the bishop's lack of insight. Normally? No, not normally, the bishop scoffed, his eyes gleaming with a hungry light, blood-red sparks dancing in their depths. Not ever. Arthur merely smiled. A small, knowing smile that sent ice crawling up my spine. The bishop's brows twitched, The first crack in his composure. A hairline fracture in the facade of absolute control. Arthur tilted his head slightly, the gesture almost playful. "But you're not at full strength, are you?" he said, his voice almost teasing, a child poking at a caged beast. "After dealing with Carrie, I imagine that took quite a bit out of you." A flicker of something passed through the bishop's expression, there and gone in an instant. Annoyance? Doubt? Uncertainty? It was brief, barely there, a shadow crossing the sun, but Arthur caught it. I knew he did. I could see it in the subtle shift of his posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of his grip on his sword. The bishop scowled, the expression transforming his features into something inhuman, something carved from hatred and hunger. "Enough!" With a snarl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, his blood astral energy surged forward, a crimson tide of sheer destruction, roaring toward Arthur like a beast unleashed from ancient chains. The air itself seemed to scream, molecules tearing apart under the onslaught of power. I opened my mouth to cry out, to warn him, the words burning in my throat. But Arthur's lips curled further, his stance relaxed, almost welcoming. And then, the blood magic vanished. Not dodged, not countered, not blocked, engulfed, swallowed whole by a vast, endless darkness that seemed to pour from Arthur's very being. A void so complete it seemed to devour light itself. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the world holds its breath in anticipation of the coming fury. And in that silence Arthur smiled. And then it appeared. By Arthur's side, a figure rose from the shadows, its presence thick and heavy, pressing against the edges of reality itself. A lich, a towering, robed monstrosity of bone and decay, its hollow sockets burning with an eerie, unnatural glow. I had never seen one before. Most people hadn't. Liches were the stuff of legends, nightmare creatures spoken of in hushed voices, wielders of magic that defied life itself. And yet, here it was. And it had been summoned by a boy 2 years younger than me. Ridiculous. My gaze snapped to Arthur. He stood there, unbothered, completely at ease in the presence of a creature that should not exist. Did he want this? A one-on-one against a bishop of the Red Chalice cult? That wasn't just reckless. That was insanity. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. The gap between them was massive. Vale was an ascendant ranker, a bishop, someone who had climbed the ranks of a cult that had no room for weakness. He wasn't just strong. He was experienced, refined. Arthur was what? A 16-year-old prodigy with a dangerous amount of confidence? "Do you not trust me?" Arthur's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and sudden. I blinked, caught off guard. He smirked. "Don't worry. I wanted to kill this bastard myself anyway." And then his mana shifted. Not gradually, not subtly. One moment it was stable. The next it doubled. The sheer weight of it hit me like a wave. He's completed the second stage of the integration process, I realized. That was no small feat. His mana had condensed, refined itself into something denser, something sharper. But still, I won't wait any longer, Bishop Vale growled, his patience finally snapping. He raised his staff to the sky, blood astral energy twisting around him in thick, writhing tendrils. Arthur tilted his head. "Well," he said, smiling, "your waiting gave me exactly the chance I needed to kill you." I swallowed, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Why don't you just leave me?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Why don't you just survive on your own?" Arthur glanced at me, and in that instant his expression softened, just slightly. "Because it's not worth it," he said simply. "If I don't save you." And then, the space around them warped. Chapter 262, Bishop Vale. The power gap between me and the bishop wasn't just vast. It was insurmountable. Despite the injuries Carrie inflicted upon him, the massive gap still existed. And I knew that. But knowing didn't change anything. The cold reality settled in my stomach like lead, Yet my grip on my sword remained steady, unwavering despite the tremors threatening to overtake my limbs. I just had to hold on, because that was all it took to make the impossible possible. One moment, one chance, that's all I needed. The air around us twisted, reality bending under the weight of something far greater than just mana. Colors inverted, then dulled to monochrome before bleeding back into existence, distorted and wrong. The very fabric of space seemed to fold in on itself, creating pockets of nothingness that swallowed sound. Bishop Vale's eyes gleamed with curiosity, a predatory light dancing in their depths. Is this a domain? His voice carried no fear, only intrigue, like a scientist observing an unexpected phenomenon beneath his microscope. Something to be studied, dissected, understood. He exhaled slowly, his grip on his staff loosening ever so slightly, the ornate wood gleaming with a sickly crimson light that pulsed in time with an unseen heartbeat. A supernatural domain. How interesting. His gaze flickered to my side, where the translucent form of the lich hovered, skeletal fingers weaving complex patterns through the air, its hollow eye sockets burning with ethereal fire. Ah, I assume this is the gift of your lich. He smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. All teeth and no warmth, like a wound carved into flesh. Incredible, truly. He looked back at me, the amusement in his expression curdling into something sharper, more dangerous. You are a terrifying talent, Arthur Nightingale. Given time, you could become a threat. A real one. His eyes darkened, pupils expanding until they nearly swallowed the iris. Unfortunately, you are far from my level. He raised his staff, the wood creaking as if alive, hungry, and the air grew thick with the scent of copper and decay. I moved, my muscles bunched, propelling me forward with every ounce of speed I could muster, pure light blazing along my blade as I prepared to strike. Too late. A tide of blood-forged mana erupted from his fingertips, twisting and surging toward me in an unrelenting wave. It wasn't just raw power. It was intelligent, alive in a way magic shouldn't be, tendrils of crimson energy seeking me out like predators scenting prey. I barely had time to react, to shift my stance. I raised my sword, pure light blazing along its edge as I swung down, cutting a diagonal arc through the air, the blade leaving trails of white fire in its wake. Impact. The sheer force rattled through my arms, my bones screaming in protest as the shock traveled up from my hands to my shoulders, then down my spine. I gritted my teeth, barely holding my ground as the wave of magic crashed against me, pushing me back, forcing my feet to slide against the warped ground of the domain. My heels dug furrows into the floor, the pressure building with each passing second. The only reason I wasn't already dead was the armor that clung to me like a second skin, Erebus's bone armor. The midnight black plates absorbed some of the impact, glowing with a dull purple light as they consumed the energy directed at me. Even so, the pressure was unbearable, like being caught in the path of an avalanche, the weight threatening to crush me completely. The bishop wasn't even trying. His expression remained relaxed, almost bored, as he directed the tide of blood magic with casual flicks of his fingers, as if conducting an orchestra rather than attempting to obliterate a human being. I shifted my stance, digging deeper, summoning more of my own mana to reinforce the blade. The pure light responded, burning brighter, pushing back against the tide, but it wasn't enough. For every inch I gained, the bishop's power surged again, forcing me back 2 more. Enough of this farce, he sighed, his voice tinged with irritation, like he was putting down a particularly annoying pet. His mana shifted, condensing, astral energy, raw, overwhelming, a tsunami compared to the mere wave he'd sent before. And then he attacked the domain itself. The space around us shuddered, cracks forming at the very edges of my perception, spreading like spiderwebs across the fabric of reality. Light spilled through these fractures, normal light from the world outside, piercing the veil of the domain. The lich hissed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone, its skeletal fingers twitching as it strained to hold the domain together, to maintain the pocket of altered reality it had created. I watched the cracks spread further, my time running out as the domain began to collapse. Now or never. I lunged forward, pushing off the ground with such force that the floor beneath me cratered, sending chunks of debris flying. Desperation. A last-ditch effort. My sword struck out, a flash of pure light arcing through the air as I aimed for the junction where his neck met his shoulder. A killing blow if it landed. Blocked. A single flick of his staff deflected my strike, the wood meeting metal with a sound like thunder. The impact sent a shockwave through my arms, my wrist nearly snapping under the sheer weight of it. The force of the collision created a blast of air that rippled outward, disturbing the dust that had settled on the floor. I twisted in midair, using the momentum from the deflection to spin, attempting to bring my blade around in a horizontal slash at his midsection, my body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a normal human. The bishop moved with impossible grace, stepping back just enough that my blade missed by millimeters, close enough that it severed a loose thread from his robes. "Predictable," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the chaos of battle. I landed, my boots skidding across the floor, and immediately launched into another attack. A feint high, then dropping low to sweep at his legs. The bishop didn't even bother to dodge the feint, seeing through it instantly, and simply raised his foot as my blade swept beneath, like a dancer performing a well-rehearsed routine. In the split second of vulnerability as my blade passed harmlessly beneath him, he struck. His staff blurred, the wood elongating, shifting, becoming something more sinister. I brought my sword up to parry, but the staff changed direction mid-strike, curving around my defenses like a living thing. I barely managed to land on my feet, but the moment I regained balance, he was already there. One moment he stood 3 paces away. The next, he materialized before me, the air distorting around his form as if reality itself bent to accommodate his presence. His hand shot forward, a blur of motion, precise strike. I dodged, or I thought I did, throwing myself to the side, my reflexes pushed to their absolute limit. Pain exploded in my ribs. A glancing blow, and still it felt like being hit by a wrecking ball. Something cracked beneath my armor, a sharp, sickening sound that resonated through my chest. The force sent me flying, tumbling across the floor like a discarded doll. I hit the ground, hard, my breath ripped from my lungs in a violent exhale. Stars exploded behind my eyes, reality fragmenting into pieces that refused to come back together. Dark spots swam in my vision. My fingers twitched around my sword, my mind struggling to catch up, to process what had happened. How had he moved so fast? How had he predicted exactly where I would dodge? I couldn't keep up. This was what it meant to fight someone above you. Not a battle, not a struggle, a lesson in inevitability. Like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands, like trying to outrun an avalanche. I tried to rise, pushing myself up on trembling arms. Blood dripped from my lips, spattering on the floor beneath me, each drop a testament to the gap between us. My armor had cracked in places, hairline fractures running through the once immaculate surface, deep dark leaking from the gaps like smoke. "Pathetic," the bishop muttered, twirling his staff with casual grace, his robes swirling around him in defiance of gravity itself. "You've impressed me, Arthur Nightingale, but tricks only get you so far." He advanced slowly, deliberately, each step resonating with purpose. I could feel his mana building again, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, promising devastation. I gasped for breath, pushing myself up, my entire body screaming in protest. My left arm hung at an odd angle, likely dislocated from the impact. I rolled my shoulder back, forcing the joint into place with a sickening pop that sent fresh waves of agony cascading through me. I needed something more, something else. The domain was failing, the walls between realities thinning with each passing second. The Lich's power was fading, its form becoming more transparent, more ethereal. Soon it would collapse entirely, and with it, any advantage it had given me. My gaze darted toward her. Rekha stood at the edge of the fading domain, her eyes wide with horror, her body trembling as she watched the one-sided battle unfold. Even from here, I could see the faint outline of symbols pulsing beneath her skin, a power waiting to be unleashed. "Reika!" I called, my voice hoarse, broken, yet somehow carrying across the distance between us. She froze, like a deer caught in headlights, her breath visibly hitching in her chest. The bishop's attention flicked toward her as well, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this new factor in the equation. His lips curled in a smirk, as if he'd discovered the punchline to a joke only he understood. Her fists clenched, her body trembling as black inked letters shimmered into existence on her skin, pulsing, waiting. They crawled up her arms like living things, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly, symbols from a language never meant for human tongues. I met her eyes across the battlefield, holding her gaze with an intensity that transcended the chaos around us. "Use it on me." Chapter 263. Her breath hitched, a small, broken sound that somehow carried over the din of battle. "What?" The word escaped her lips like a prayer, like a plea. "Now!" I roared, the command tearing itself from my throat with a force that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The bishop turned back to me, his eyes glinting with newfound interest, like a collector who had just spotted a rare specimen. He raised his staff again, the wood humming with power, with promise. I raised my sword in defiance, pure light flickering along its length, struggling to maintain its brilliance as my strength waned. My stance was wide, unstable, my body betraying me as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. Gifts weren't meant to be shared. That was the rule, the fundamental law. No one could transfer the core of their gift to another, it was part of them, bound to their very existence. Like trying to give away your heartbeat, like trying to lend someone your breath. Impossible. Unthinkable. The only known exception was Rachel. Her gift could be given freely, like a blessing, like sunlight spilling over the world. A miracle made flesh, a law unto herself. Mine, lucent harmony, could do it too. Technically, it was inefficient, wasteful, a glorified trick. Most of the time it wasn't worth the effort, the power lost in the transfer reducing it to a pale shadow of its true potential. But Reika's gift? Her gift was something different, something raw, something that bent the rules in a way nothing else did. A contradiction, an impossibility, a glitch in the fabric of reality itself. Because Reika's gift didn't just enhance her strength or sharpen her senses. It changed her very foundation, her mana rank itself. Right now, she had forced herself from light yellow rank to white rank. A temporary surge, an unnatural leap forward. An impossible increase, like skipping 5 rungs on a ladder in a single bound. The only gift in existence that could do that. The bishop launched another attack, this one more focused, more precise. A spear of condensed blood magic that cut through the air with a sound like a banshee's wail, aimed directly at my heart. I twisted, barely avoiding it, the spear grazing my shoulder and leaving a trail of searing pain in its wake. The wound hissed and bubbled, the blood magic trying to burrow deeper, to consume me from within. No. Reika shook her head violently, panic flashing across her face, her eyes wild with fear. The suffering, the dread. You can't. The black symbols on her skin writhed faster, more agitated, responding to her emotional state. Tendrils of darkness curled around her limbs, like chains, like shackles. I must, I said. My voice didn't waver, despite the blood bubbling up in my throat, despite the edges of my vision growing darker by the second. Please. The bishop stalked closer, his patience wearing thin, his power building to a crescendo that promised oblivion. With each step, the ground beneath him blackened and withered, as if life itself retreated from his presence. I staggered back, raising my sword again, but the motion lacked conviction, lacked strength. The pure light was dimming, flickering like a candle in a storm, moments from being extinguished completely. Reika looked at me, eyes wild with disbelief, with something that might have been betrayal. Are you doing this just to save me? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implications, with unspoken emotions. Time seemed to slow, the chaos of battle receding as I held her gaze across the distance that separated us. No. I shook my head, the answer slipping out without hesitation, without artifice. I'm doing this for myself. Her breath hitched, a small, wounded sound that somehow cut through the noise of battle, through the roaring in my ears. I was selfish. I had always been selfish, taking what I needed, using what was offered, all in service to a goal that sometimes seemed more like an obsession than a purpose. I wanted love when I didn't deserve it. I wanted love with someone I didn't deserve. And I wanted to burn down the world that dared to harm the tiny, fragile thing that made life more than survival. This thing called happiness. I wasn't doing this because I cared about Reika. This was payback. Against a world that saw children as nothing more than tools to break and reshape. Against a world that thought it was fine to take something innocent and twist it into something useful, something profitable, something with purpose beyond mere existence. Because when I looked at her, I saw myself. The child I had been. The broken thing I had become. The monster I had made of myself to survive. And that was something I couldn't ignore, couldn't turn away from, couldn't pretend didn't matter. Give it to me. The bishop lunged, his patience finally exhausted. His staff spinning in complex patterns that left trails of blood-red light in the air, forming sigils that burned themselves into reality itself. I braced myself, knowing I couldn't dodge, couldn't block, couldn't hope to survive what was coming. I wasn't a hero. I didn't deserve to be a hero. But that didn't stop me from wanting, just once, to save someone from the same fate. To shield one person from the darkness that had consumed me, that had made me what I was. Reika clenched her fists, her knuckles white with strain, indecision warring across her features. Then, slowly, her hands unclenched, fingers splaying wide as if releasing something invisible. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the weight of a decision that couldn't be unmade. Her eyes shut, lashes fluttering against pale cheeks, and I felt it. The black letters on her skin moved, slithering across her flesh like living ink, detaching themselves one by one. They hovered in the air between us, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no heartbeat, that followed no pattern known to human minds. And then, they shot toward me, a swarm of darkness that cut through the fading domain like arrows through mist. Pain. Not the kind that made you wince. Not the kind that left bruises or fractures or bleeding wounds. The kind that unmade you. The kind that boiled you alive from the inside out, that rewrote your very being one agonizing atom at a time. The symbols burrowed into my skin, merging with my flesh, becoming part of me in a way that defied description. Each one brought with it a new dimension of suffering, a new layer of agony that transcended physical sensation. Every cell in my body screamed, a chorus of torment that threatened to shatter my mind, to reduce me to nothing more than a vessel for pain itself. And I smiled, because in exchange I took her power. The black symbols settled into my flesh, pulsing with a rhythm that gradually synchronized with my heartbeat, becoming extensions of my will, of my being. And my mana rose. Low integration rank. The first surge was like a dam breaking, power flooding through channels never meant to contain such forces. My vision blurred, colors shifting, becoming more vivid, more intense. The air around me crackled with energy, with potential. Then, mid-integration rank. The second surge was stronger, more violent. My muscles bulged, veins standing out in stark relief against my skin, as power coursed through me like liquid fire. The Erebus bone armor responded, shifting, expanding, becoming more elaborate, more complete, as if awakening from a slumber. I could feel it, every fiber of my being stretching, cracking, reshaping itself under the sheer weight of power flooding through me. Bones reinforced themselves, muscles densified, neural pathways rewired for increased speed, increased processing. The bishop faltered, his attack hesitating mid-formation as he sensed the change, as he realized something had fundamentally shifted in the dynamic between us. "This is the limit?" Luna's voice echoed in my mind, cool and detached, a reminder of boundaries that couldn't be crossed, of lines that shouldn't be blurred. I exhaled, tasting blood, metallic and warm, a physical reminder of the price being paid for this borrowed power. I know. And I raised my sword once more, pure light blazing along its length with renewed vigor, burning so bright it cast no shadows, only pure, unfiltered radiance. The bishop's eyes widened, a fraction of genuine surprise crossing his features before his mask of confidence reasserted itself. Interesting, he murmured, adjusting his stance, his grip on his staff tightening. Very interesting indeed. I didn't respond. I moved. Chapter 264. 5 Stages of Swordsmanship. Sword intent was the first level, imbuing one's blade with purpose. I had mastered that years ago, forcing my will into the metal until the blade became an extension of my thoughts. But this was different. As I slashed forward, the blade seemed to sing, a high, clear note that cut through the chaos of battle. My sword vibrated with each strike, not from impact but from something deeper, something more fundamental. Sword resonance. The second level of swordsmanship, where the blade began to vibrate with the swordsman's intent, amplifying each strike through harmonic frequencies that existed between wielder and weapon. It shouldn't have been possible for me normally, but Reika's gift had pushed me temporarily into mid-integration rank, and with it came access to techniques that would normally be beyond my reach. The bishop blocked my first strike, his staff intercepting my blade with precision. But this time the impact was different. My sword hummed against his weapon, the vibration traveling through the staff and into his hands. I saw a flicker of discomfort cross his features, his grip adjusting to compensate. Sword resonance? He murmured, genuine surprise coloring his tone. At your age. I pressed the advantage, not wasting breath on words, each strike flowing into the next in a continuous sequence of motion. The pure light that surrounded my blade pulsed with each vibration, creating a strobe-like effect that made tracking the weapon's path difficult even for someone of the bishop's caliber. For a brief, glorious moment, I matched him, strike for strike, step for step, our weapons blurring as we exchanged blows at speeds that would have been impossible for me just minutes before. But it wasn't enough. The bishop's initial surprise faded quickly, his movements adjusting to counter my newfound technique. His staff blurred, intercepting each strike with precise counters that diffused the vibrations, neutralizing the advantage of sword resonance through sheer skill and experience. A temporary boost, he noted, his voice calm despite the increased pace of our exchange. Impressive, but fleeting. He was right. I could already feel Reika's gift burning through my system at an alarming rate. The black symbols on my skin pulsed faster, some already beginning to fade as their power was consumed. The borrowed mana was a wildfire, beautiful but unsustainable, burning too hot and too fast to last. And the bishop knew it. He began to press forward, his attacks becoming more aggressive, more calculated. No longer satisfied with simply countering my strikes, he launched his own offensive, each movement flowing into the next with the precision of someone who had mastered their craft centuries ago. I parried a thrust aimed at my throat, the impact sending vibrations up my arm despite the sword resonance. My next counter was a fraction slower than it should have been, the borrowed power already beginning to wane. The domain around us was collapsing faster now. The Lich's power stretched to its limit as it tried to maintain the altered reality, while simultaneously feeding energy into the Erebus bone armor that protected me. I needed more. The realization hit me with cold certainty. I was still losing, just more slowly than before. Erebus, I whispered, the name passing my lips like a prayer. The Lich's spectral form wavered, its hollow eye sockets fixing on me with an intensity that transcended death itself. Release your full power. I felt rather than heard its response. A warning, a caution, the knowledge that my body wasn't ready to channel that level of energy, that doing so could tear me apart from the inside. I know, I said, my voice steady despite the blood dripping from the corner of my mouth. Do it anyway. For a heartbeat nothing changed. Then everything did. The Lich's form seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing more than a pinpoint of darkness, a singularity of negative space that defied perception. Then that point expanded, not outward but into me, merging with my being in a way that the previous bone armor had only hinted at. Darkness flooded my system, cool and ancient, bringing with it memories that weren't mine, centuries of existence, of watching civilizations rise and fall, of accumulating knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds. The Erebus's bone armor transformed, no longer simply covering my body but becoming my body, the distinction between armor and flesh blurring until there was no clear separation. Plates of midnight black bone sprouted from my skin, forming an exoskeleton of impossible geometry. The domain, rather than collapsing, stabilized but changed. The space around us darkened, stars appearing in the void above, a cosmic emptiness that swallowed sound and light alike. This wasn't just an alteration of local reality anymore. It was a pocket dimension unto itself, a space where the normal rules of physics bent to accommodate the will of its creator. A higher domain of a lich, the bishop whispered, and for the first time, I heard a note of genuine concern in his voice. A death space. I lunged forward, my movements blurring beyond what should have been possible even with Reika's gift. The sword in my hand had changed too, its blade now wreathed in a combination of pure light and shadow, opposing forces that should have annihilated each other instead coexisting in impossible harmony. The bishop raised his staff, blood magic surging to counter my attack. But I was already elsewhere, appearing behind him in a flicker of shadow, my blade descending in an arc that would have severed his spine if it had connected. But it didn't. Even with Erebus's full power flowing through me, even with sword resonance amplifying each strike, even with the domain warping reality to my advantage, the bishop was still faster, still more skilled, still more powerful. He twisted, his staff intercepting my blade at the last possible moment, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled through the domain itself. The force of the collision sent me skidding backward, my feet leaving trails in the ground as I struggled to maintain my balance. Impressive, the bishop acknowledged, but there was a new tension in his stance, a readiness that hadn't been there before. You forced me to take you seriously. He raised his staff, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of blood and decay. His astral energy manifested fully now, a crimson tide that swirled around him like a hurricane, distorting the very fabric of the domain with its intensity. I knew what was coming. I could feel Reika's gift fading rapidly now, the black symbols on my skin dissolving one by one, the borrowed power returning to its rightful owner. Erebus's full power was consuming me from within, the price for channeling such energy without adequate preparation becoming evident in the way my vision blurred, in the way blood vessels ruptured beneath my skin. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. I charged forward, sword raised, pure light resonating along its length as I poured everything I had into one final attack. The sword resonance reached a fever pitch, the blade vibrating so rapidly it became a blur even to my enhanced perception, the sound it produced rising beyond the range of human hearing. The bishop met my charge head-on, his staff whirling in patterns too complex to follow, each movement precise, each angle calculated to maximum effect. Blood magic surged forward, a tidal wave of crimson energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. Our weapons met. The collision was cataclysmic. For a single, breathless moment, we were evenly matched, his overwhelming power against my borrowed strength and desperate techniques, a perfect equilibrium of opposing forces. Then the balance shifted. I felt it first in my arms, a tremor that started in my fingertips and spread upward, my muscles failing under the strain of channeling too much power for too long. The sword resonance faltered, the blade's vibration becoming erratic, disharmonious. The bishop smiled, sensing weakness, and pressed forward. His staff whirled, striking my sword with such force that cracks appeared along its length, the metal groaning under pressure it was never designed to withstand. Pure light flickered, dimming as my concentration wavered, as exhaustion and pain threatened to overwhelm me. I was pushed back, step by step, the ground beneath me crumbling as the bishop's power overwhelmed my defenses. The Erebus bone armor began to fracture, pieces falling away like autumn leaves, the connection to the lich weakening as my own strength failed. Blood magic seeped through the cracks in my defenses, burning wherever it touched, eating away at flesh and bone with equal hunger. I gritted my teeth against the pain, refusing to cry out, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing my suffering. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The bishop approached slowly, unhurried, his staff tapping against the ground with each step. There was no triumph in his expression, no gloating, just the calm certainty of someone who had known the outcome from the beginning. "You understand now," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "The gap between us." I tried to rise, to defy him even in defeat, but my body refused to obey, muscles spasming as the last of Rekha's gift burned away, as the consequences of channeling Erebus's full power made themselves known in agonizing detail. The bishop raised his staff, astral energy gathering at its tip, a sphere of condensed blood magic that hummed with deadly intent. "A valiant effort," he acknowledged, "but ultimately futile." I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, suddenly, I felt it, something deep within me stirring, a pulse of energy that wasn't my own. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind, but then it grew louder, stronger, like a heartbeat hammering inside my chest. "What?" I staggered, clutching my head as the world around me seemed to shift. The air felt different, heavier, almost bending under the weight of something I couldn't quite grasp. Time itself seemed to slow, the edges of reality warping around me. It was now or never. I grasped at everything before me and peeled it away, uncovering the truth. The truth that I simply could not lose. The truth of my second gift. Chapter 265. Jean Ashbluff wasn't fond of Arthur's plans. They were too elaborate, too dependent on precise timing and multiple moving parts. But that didn't change the fact that they worked. Usually, as he watched 3 Red Knot Guild members approach through the dimly lit corridor, Jean sighed. This part wasn't in the plan. Arthur hadn't accounted for the additional security on the east wing of the building. A minor oversight, but one that required improvisation. "Ashbluff," Jean murmured to himself, feeling the familiar chill of his gift stirring beneath his skin. "Remember who you are." The guards spotted him, their postures shifting instantly from casual patrol to combat ready. The one in front, tall, muscular, wearing the silver and crimson uniform of Red Knot with practiced ease, pointed at Jean. "Intruder! Halt!" Jean didn't halt. Instead, he slid one hand into his pocket and activated his comm link with a single tap. "Oversight in Sector 4, he said calmly, knowing Arthur would understand. "Proceeding with alternative approach." The guards charged, mana flaring around them. Low silver rank. Insignificant. Jean didn't even bother drawing the ceremonial dagger at his hip. "You're trespassing on guild property," the lead guard growled, astral energy gathering around his fists. Jean tilted his head slightly. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." His shadow rippled, then stretched, not following the laws of light and perspective, but extending with purpose, with hunger. The guards faltered, sensing something wrong but unable to identify the source of their sudden unease. Too late. From Jin's shadow rose 3 specters, translucent figures formed of darkness and malice. They moved with unnatural speed, each targeting a guard with unhesitating precision. The lead guard managed a half-formed shield of astral energy before the first specter reached him. For a moment the barrier held, then shattered as the specter passed through it like smoke through a screen. The man screamed, dropping to his knees as the spectral entity invaded his shadow, corrupting it from within. The other 2 fared no better. One tried to flee, making it 3 steps before his own shadow rose up and wrapped around his legs, dragging him down to the floor. The third attempted an offensive spell, gathering red-tinged mana between his palms, only for the energy to sputter and die as Jin's specter touched him. In seconds, it was over. 3 bodies lay unconscious on the floor. Jin's comm link buzzed. "Status," Callie's voice, tense but controlled. "Proceeding to checkpoint 3, Jean replied, turning left at the next junction. "Minor resistance. Nothing significant. More cultists in Red Knot uniforms. Exactly where Arthur predicted." Arthur's engaged the bishop, she said, the words tight. Carrie's down. Jin's steps faltered momentarily. That wasn't part of the plan. Carrie was supposed to distract the bishop and then team up on him with the knight captain of Redmond while Arthur secured Reka and retreated to safety. How bad? Unknown. But Arthur's fighting him alone. Jin cursed under his breath. Arthur had contingencies for almost everything, but a direct confrontation with Bishop Vale this early wasn't ideal. Even with Erebus and his tactical brilliance, Arthur was still outmatched by several tiers. Is he using Reka? The comm link crackled with interference before Callie's voice returned. Yes, but it won't be enough. We need the final piece. Jin nodded to himself, increasing his pace. The final piece. Of course. Jin hadn't questioned how Arthur knew Rachel was in Redmond City. Just as he hadn't questioned how Arthur knew which Red Knot members were actually cultists in disguise. Arthur simply knew things, gathering information through a network so discreet that even Jin, with all the resources of the Ashbluff family, couldn't trace it. The remainder of his escape from the Red Knot building proved surprisingly straightforward. Arthur had mapped every exit, every patrol route with obsessive precision. He'd even highlighted which Red Knot members were genuine and which were cult infiltrators. The emergency response teams moved exactly as Arthur had predicted, gathering in sectors far from Jin's escape path. 20 minutes later, Jin emerged into a narrow alleyway 6 blocks from the guild headquarters. His clothing changed, his presence concealed beneath a subtle glamour that discouraged casual observation. Now for the final part of Arthur's plan. The rendezvous point was a small cafe in Redmond's commercial district. Busy enough to blend in, quiet enough for a private conversation. Arthur had chosen it because of its position relative to Rachel's likely patrol route, a calculated intersection designed to seem coincidental. Jin arrived first, ordering a hideously sweet chocolate concoction that prompted the barista to raise a skeptical eyebrow. He took a seat by the window, positioning himself to be visible from the street while appearing casually engaged with his drink. Arthur's timing was immaculate, as always. Jin counted down silently in his head. 3, 2, 1. Rachel walked past the window. Her pace was unhurried, her eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. She wore the standard Mythos Academy field uniform. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, practical for the mission she was supposedly here to complete. Jin watched her pass, then deliberately knocked his spoon to the floor with a clatter that carried just enough to catch her attention. Rachel glanced inside, her eyes passing over him once, then returning with a flash of recognition. Perfect. Jin nodded slightly, an acknowledgement between acquaintances. Nothing urgent, nothing suspicious, just enough to draw her in. Rachel hesitated for only a moment before entering the cafe. Her movements were fluid, graceful, betraying the physical enhancements of her rank. She approached Jin's table, her expression politely curious but guarded. "Jin Ashbluff," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you in Redmond." Jin gestured to the seat across from him, which Rachel took after a moment's consideration. "A coincidence," Jin lied smoothly. "I'm here on a mission." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. Jin could see the calculations behind them, the assessment of probabilities. She didn't believe in coincidences any more than Arthur did. "A mission," she repeated. "In a city where Arthur happens to have his mission." Jin sipped his drink, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Arthur had choreographed this conversation in advance, explaining exactly how to guide Rachel to the desired conclusion without appearing manipulative. "Arthur," Jin finally said, as if the name had just reminded him of something. "You two are still not speaking." Rachel's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "That's not your concern." "Perhaps not," Jin agreed. He set his drink down, meeting her gaze directly. "Though it might interest you to know that he's currently at the Red Knot Guild headquarters. I'm aware of his assignment. Fighting a bishop. Alone." The change in Rachel was immediate and dramatic. Her mana density spiked so suddenly that the air around her shimmered with suppressed energy. Several patrons nearby glanced over, sensing the disturbance without understanding its source. "What did you say?" Her voice had dropped to a whisper, but there was nothing soft about it. Jean leaned forward. "The Red Knot Guild has been infiltrated by a cult. Their guild master is Bishop Vale himself. Arthur confronted him directly to save a girl named Reka. He's outmatched even with Erebus." "Arthur knew you'd be in the city," Jean continued, ignoring her objection. "He didn't ask for your help directly because he's an arrogant, stubborn fool," Rachel finished, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. A hairline fracture appeared in the wood beneath her grip. Jean nodded. "He won't survive without assistance, specifically without your gift. And the Knight Captain." Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Jean thought she might simply walk away, the one reaction Arthur hadn't predicted. But then she looked down at him, and Jean felt a chill that had nothing to do with his own necromantic abilities. Her gift was activating even as she stood there, responding to emotions too powerful to contain. "Rachel," Jean called after her, following the script Arthur had provided. "He didn't ask because he didn't want to endanger you." She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "I know exactly why he didn't ask." Jean remained seated, taking another sip of his drink. Everything was proceeding according to Arthur's design. The players were moving into their final positions. The trap was nearly complete. Yet Jean couldn't shake the memory of Rachel's eyes in that last moment. The absolute, terrifying focus in them. The promise of something that even Arthur might not have fully calculated. For the first time since joining Arthur's schemes, Jean felt a sliver of doubt. Because those sapphire eyes sparkled with something too twisted. Chapter 266. Gifts were rare. So rare that those born with them were practically fated to break past the wall, that invisible boundary where most warriors, no matter how talented, found themselves stranded. Less than 1 in 100,000 possessed the spark of a gift, and even fewer managed to ignite it properly. But not all gifts were equal. Some, like the legendary Inyang body, stood at the pinnacle, one of the 4 greatest gifts in all of recorded history. A power that could rewrite reality itself, bending the laws of existence to its wielder's will. Others, while still formidable, simply didn't compare, footnotes in the grand tapestry of power that defined this world's hierarchy. Mine, Lucent Harmony, was powerful. A gift born from Luna's will, surpassing even Ian's dragon will, which had been diluted by the simple fact that Tiamat had split her power among 3. It was strong. It was enough. Or so I had thought. Then came the realization that clawed at the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored, digging deeper with each confrontation, each near-death experience. The strongest figures in this world, Lucifer Windward and Jack Blazespout, the protagonist and the antagonist, had 2 gifts. And that was terrifying. The gap between 1 gift and 2 wasn't linear. It was exponential, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge through conventional means. Jack's second gift had come from the heavenly demon's intervention. A twist of fate, a cruel handout from something far beyond mortal understanding. Lucifer. Well, he was the protagonist. Of course he had 2. The universe itself bent over backward for him, rearranging probabilities, manufacturing coincidences, all to ensure his ascension. Even Julius Slatemark, the first emperor, one of the most legendary figures in history, had he possessed 2 gifts as well? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a persistent ache that never quite subsided. The historical records were unclear, contradictory, as if the truth itself couldn't bear to be pinned down. Could I gain a second gift? Or was I doomed to be a step behind them forever? That thought haunted me. It shadowed my victories, tainted my achievements, whispered doubt into every moment of triumph. And then, reality decided to shatter my expectations. Because right now, in this moment, I had a second gift. Soul resonance. It was absurd. A power beyond overpowered. The kind of ability that shouldn't exist in a world even remotely concerned with balance. The kind of gift that would have scholars and powermongers alike foaming at the mouth if they knew of its existence. I could sync with the souls of those around me, borrowing their abilities, even storing one of their techniques as my own. I wouldn't be able to perfectly copy it, not unless I reached their level of mastery, but that didn't matter. The sheer utility of this ability was staggering, its potential limited only by the strength of those around me. And right now, I was about to put it to use. The bishop loomed before me, his blood magic saturating the air, weighing it down with the stench of copper and decay. His face was a mask of cruel amusement, like a child watching an insect struggle in a spider's web. He knew the gap between us. He knew I was running on borrowed time, that Reika's gift was already beginning to fade, the black symbols on my skin dimming, dissolving. Without hesitation, I activated soul resonance. The strongest soul in the vicinity, no surprise, was Luna. Even sealed, even diminished, she was still something beyond mortal comprehension. A god in chains was still a god. Our souls were bound, intrinsically linked by covenant and circumstance. I reached out to her, tapping into the dormant power that still crackled beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. And it worked. A surge of raw, unfiltered energy flooded through me, crashing against the confines of my mortal form like a tsunami against a sandcastle. My vision blurred, reality fragmenting into shards of perception that refused to align properly. Power. Her power. Luna was a Qilin, a mythical beast that walked between storms and moonlight, a force of nature barely contained in flesh. The sheer number of abilities available to me was overwhelming, a torrent of possibilities that threatened to drown my consciousness. But there was no hesitation. The choice was obvious. Qilinification. It was similar to draconification, how those bonded with dragons could take on draconic traits, harden their skin into scales, reshape their hearts to pump fire through their veins. But Qilinification wasn't just a transformation. It was an ascension, a step toward something transcendent, a glimpse of what it meant to exist beyond the mundane. And of course, it had many abilities. For now, I focused on the two abilities that mattered. Soul vision. The world opened to me. My vision sharpened, not just physically, but spiritually. I could see the flow of mana, not as vague impressions, but as tangible currents, threads of power weaving through reality. Every movement, every shift in the battlefield became predictable. I could see the intention before the action, the gathering of power before its release. Paired with Seraphim's embrace, my perception soared to something terrifying, something that shouldn't be possible for someone of my rank. The bishop's blood magic was no longer just crimson energy. It was a living tapestry of malice, each tendril pulsing with purpose, with history, with the stolen vitality of countless sacrifices. I could see the weaknesses in his technique, the split-second gaps between one movement and the next. Mythic body. Power surged through my muscles, my bones, my very essence. Strength, speed, endurance. Everything multiplied. My human limits stretched, cracking apart as something greater took their place. My body didn't just enhance, it changed, a step toward the true form of a Qilin. My skin hardened, not into scales but into something more subtle, more refined. A shimmering barrier that deflected both physical blows and magical assault. My muscles densified, fibers rearranging themselves into configurations that defied conventional anatomy. Of course, closer was a relative term. Compared to a real Qilin, I was still pathetic. A human taking their first steps in a storm while Luna had long since become the tempest itself. A candle flickering beside the sun. But it was enough. For now it was enough. Because help would come soon. I moved. The bishop's eyes widened fractionally. The first genuine surprise I'd managed to elicit from him. I was no longer just fast. I was a blur, a distortion in space that his eyes struggled to track. My sword, still cracked from our earlier exchange, hummed with renewed energy, pure light flaring along its length, mingling with the silvery glow of Qilin essence. I struck not at his center, where his defense was strongest, but at the periphery, the outer edge of his mana field, where blood magic thinned to conserve energy. My blade sliced through the barrier, drawing a shallow line across his forearm. First blood. The bishop hissed, more in surprise than pain, his composure slipping for a fleeting moment. Impossible! he murmured, his gaze reassessing me. What are you? I didn't waste breath on a response. Instead, I pressed the advantage, my body flowing from one strike to the next in a continuous sequence of motion. Each attack targeted a different angle, a different approach, never allowing him to settle into a defensive rhythm. High slash to the neck, feint to the left, twist into a low sweep at the legs, then up again in a diagonal cut aimed at the junction of shoulder and torso. I moved like water, like wind, my form incorporeal yet devastating. But the bishop wasn't an ascendant ranker for nothing. His recovery was instantaneous, his blood magic surging to compensate for the new threat I posed. His staff blurred, intercepting each of my strikes with precision that defied mortal limits. Where my blade found purchase, his blood magic flowed, sealing wounds even as they formed, regenerating damaged tissue in the span of heartbeats. Better, he acknowledged, a thin smile playing at the edges of his lips, but still insufficient. He counterattacked and the world slowed. Chapter 267. With soul vision and Seraphim's embrace, I could see every movement in excruciating detail. The way his staff twisted, leaving trails of crimson energy in its wake. The complex sigils he wove with his free hand, blood magic condensing into formations of staggering complexity. The shift in his stance, weight transferring from back foot to front in a motion too fluid to be entirely human. I saw it all, but seeing wasn't enough. I parried the first strike, barely, my sword screaming in protest as cracks spread further along its length. The second blow I dodged, contorting my body in ways that should have been impossible, the edge of his staff missing my throat by millimeters. The third hit home, a spike of crystallized blood, conjured from thin air, pierced my shoulder, driving through muscle and bone with horrific ease. Pain exploded across my senses, white-hot and all-consuming. I staggered, blood flooding my mouth as the spike's magic spread through my system, attempting to corrupt my very essence. I ripped myself away, tearing tissue in the process, but better that than allowing his magic to take root within me. The wound bled profusely, a steady stream of crimson staining the already ruined floor. The bishop pressed forward, sensing weakness, his attacks increasing in both speed and ferocity. I was on the defensive now, retreating step by step, each movement more desperate than the last. His blood magic filled the air, a storm of crimson death that left no avenue of escape. And beneath it all, a deeper pain was building. The borrowed power from Reika's gift was fading rapidly now, the black symbols on my skin dissolving one by one, returning to their rightful owner. With each symbol that vanished, a wave of agony crashed through me, as if my very cells were being torn apart and reassembled incorrectly. Worse, soul resonance and kilinification were exacting their own price. My human form wasn't meant to channel such power, wasn't built to sustain the kind of energy that coursed through my veins. Blood vessels ruptured beneath my skin, creating a patchwork of bruises across my body. My vision blurred, reality fracturing around the edges as my consciousness struggled to remain intact. I was burning from the inside out, consumed by the very power I had called upon. The bishop saw it. Of course he did. His eyes gleamed with the recognition of inevitable victory, with the satisfaction of a predator watching its prey weaken with each passing moment. "Your body is failing," he observed, his voice almost gentle, as if speaking to a terminally ill patient. "No human could sustain what you're attempting. The girl's gift, this other power you've manifested, they're tearing you apart." He wasn't wrong. I could feel it, the dissonance between mortal flesh and immortal power, the fundamental incompatibility that threatened to unravel my existence. Reika's gift had been dangerous enough on its own. Adding soul resonance and kilinification on top of that, it was suicide by another name. But I had no choice. I lunged forward, ignoring the protest of shredded muscles and cracking bones, pouring every ounce of remaining strength into one final, desperate attack. My sword, now barely holding together, blazed with the last of my pure light, a dying star that refused to go gently. The bishop sidestepped my strike with insulting ease, his staff spinning to intercept my blade. The impact shattered my sword completely, fragments of steel scattering across the floor like fallen stars. The force of the blow sent me stumbling backward, defenseless, exhausted. I collapsed to one knee, blood dripping from a dozen wounds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun around me, reality becoming increasingly difficult to grasp as my body rebelled against the abuse it had endured. "A valiant effort," the bishop said, approaching slowly, his staff tapping against the ground with each step. "Truly impressive for one so young. But this is the inevitable outcome when you challenge powers beyond your comprehension." He raised his staff, blood magic gathering at its tip, a sphere of condensed malice that promised oblivion. "Perhaps in another life you might have grown to become a worthy adversary. A shame we'll never know. Couldn't move, couldn't dodge, couldn't even raise my arms in a futile attempt at defense. My body had reached its absolute limit, punished beyond endurance by the conflicting forces I had channeled. So this was how it ended. Not with victory, but with the harsh lesson that determination alone wasn't enough, that some gaps couldn't be bridged through sheer will. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, a surge of power. Not from within, but from without. A presence that hit my senses like a physical blow. A pressure that made even the bishop falter, his attack hesitating mid-formation. The air changed. There was no other way to describe it. The atmosphere itself seemed to lighten, as if some fundamental aspect of reality had been adjusted, recalibrated to accommodate something greater. The bishop turned sharply, eyes widening in genuine alarm. "What?" A blade of pure light pierced the doors, melting through solid metal as if it were nothing more than mist. The doors exploded inward, reduced to molten slag that scattered across the floor, hissing as it cooled. Two figures stepped through the ruined entrance. The first was a man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His armor gleamed white and gold, the insignia of Redmond City's Night Division emblazoned across the breastplate. His manner was a controlled inferno, dense and disciplined, the mark of an ascendant ranker who had earned his station through merit rather than politics. Knight Captain Valen Thornwright. But it was the second figure that drew my attention, that made my heart stutter in my chest. Rachel stood beside the Knight Captain, her honey-blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her uniform torn and singed as if she had fought her way here. Her eyes, normally warm, normally gentle, blazed with an inner light that transcended mere rage. This was something deeper, something primal. The fury of someone who had found what was theirs threatened. "You?" the bishop hissed, his composure finally cracking. The Knight Captain, and a mere student. Valen Thornwright didn't bother with a response. His sword, a simple, unadorned blade that nonetheless radiated power, rose in a formal salute. "Bishop Vale," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of authority, of judgment. "By the authority vested in me by the Imperial Court and the city of Redmond, you are hereby charged with treason, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity." The bishop's laugh was hollow, brittle. "You think you can simply arrest me? I am beyond your jurisdiction, beyond your comprehension." "I'm not here to arrest you," Thornwright replied calmly. "I'm here to execute you." The two ascendant rankers moved simultaneously, their clash creating a shockwave that rattled the very foundations of the building. Blood magic met holy light, darkness against illumination, in a contest of wills that transcended mere physical combat. But Rachel didn't join the battle. Instead, she ran to me, her steps urgent, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. She dropped to her knees beside me, heedless of the blood that soaked the floor, that stained her uniform. "Arthur, you idiot," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You absolute, unbelievable idiot." Before I could respond. Not that I had the strength to, her arms were around me, pulling me close in an embrace that felt like salvation itself. Her warmth enveloped me, a stark contrast to the cold that had been seeping into my bones, the chill of approaching death. I felt it then, her gift activating. Whereas Reka's gift had been pain and transformation, Rachel's was healing and restoration. Golden light flowed from her hands, from her heart, washing over me in waves of gentle radiance. Wounds began to close, torn muscles knitting themselves back together, fractured bones realigning. But more than that, her gift purified, cleansed. The corrupting influence of the bishop's blood magic, the strain of channeling Qilin power through a human vessel, the damage from Reika's gift, all of it gradually washed away by Rachel's power. "Why didn't you call me?" she demanded, her face pressed against my shoulder. I could feel her tears, hot against my skin. "Why do you always do this? Try to carry everything alone?" I wanted to answer, wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come, trapped beneath the overwhelming relief of her presence, of her touch. In the background, the battle between Thornright and Vale continued, their powers clashing in spectacular displays of light and shadow. But here, in this moment, there was only Rachel, her gift, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. Help had arrived, and for once I allowed myself to be saved. Chapter 268, Rachel Creighton. I watched the man in front of me, my hands glowing with soft, golden light as I healed his wounds. Arthur lay still, his breath steady but heavy, his body recovering from the absurd levels of power he had just forced himself to wield. The injuries were deep, layered with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. I pursed my lips. Then I asked, "Did you predict this?" Arthur's eyes widened slightly. He looked at me, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. I knew him too well. "When the Baron told me the night captain was busy, I knew you were here," he finally said, voice rough but calm. "So I had to adjust my plans accordingly." I frowned. "Why didn't you just call me?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "Why didn't you tell me before going up against a bishop?" Arthur exhaled, closing his eyes briefly. Then he looked at me again, and there was something raw, something achingly real in his gaze. "I need to be stronger, Rachel," he murmured. His fingers twitched, as if reaching for me, but stopping just short. "I love you," he said simply. "I want to protect you, with my own strength." Something in me broke. Tears pricked at my eyes before I even realized what was happening. A sharp, overwhelming swell of emotion surged through me, and I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep healing him even as my vision blurred. I wasn't stupid. I knew how Arthur thought. I knew his mind worked in ways most people couldn't even begin to follow. But hearing those words, hearing him say them, made me hurt, because I loved him too. So much it terrified me. And he kept doing this, risking himself, throwing himself into the jaws of people who would tear him apart without a second thought, carrying the weight of everything, always thinking he had to be the one to take the fall. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I sniffled, blinking rapidly, trying to focus, trying to keep the light steady in my hands. That was when I noticed it. The black ink laced across his skin. Dark letters curled over his forearms, his wrists, pulsing, alive, unnatural. My hands hovered over them, my magic flickering slightly. "What is this?" I asked, wiping my face and focusing on the wrongness sinking into his body. Arthur let out a breath. "Reika's gift." I froze, my brow furrowed, my hands pausing. "Reika, a girl." I stared at him, my hands still hovering over his arms. "A girl gave you this power?" I said slowly, tilting my head. Arthur blinked. Wait, that's not." I smiled. Then I reached into my spatial ring and pulled out a pair of enchanted cuffs. Before he could react, I grabbed his wrists and snapped them on. Arthur blinked at me again, confused. "Rachel? I'm capturing you now," I said sweetly, tightening the cuffs with a satisfied click. Arthur opened his mouth, probably to argue. Then, something shifted. The black ink on his skin shuddered. And then it began to fade. Arthur froze. The power he had stolen, the strength he had borrowed, it was vanishing. His breathing hitched. His body jerked slightly as something tore itself away from him. I watched as his limbs trembled, as his muscles strained, as the sheer recoil of his actions finally hit him. And I smiled wider. "See," I said, brushing my hair back. I told you not to overdo it. You're enjoying this? Arthur muttered weakly as his body gave out, collapsing against me. I let out a soft hum, patting his head like he was some overworked idiot who had finally realized just how mortal he actually was. You won't die with me around, I whispered, my hands glowing as I poured healing magic into him. My brows furrowed, the warmth of my spell doing little to ease the knot of worry tightening in my chest. Because as much as I liked holding him like this, his weight pressing against me, the warmth of his breath on my shoulder, his injuries were bad. Not just bad, dangerous. He had pushed himself too far. No, not too far. He had demolished the limit, trampled over it, and then had the audacity to keep going. Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to something sharper. You cannot do this again, ever. He didn't respond. Because he knew. Because if he did this again, if he pushed himself to this extent one more time, he could actually die. And I wasn't letting that happen. I tightened my grip on him. TCH. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Luckily, you're still not that strong. Yet, he would be. I knew he would be. And when that day came, when his power reached a point where no one could stop him, I would have to capture him before that. But right now, he was still mine to keep in check. I rubbed my ring, summoning a set of potions into my hand. The highest grade, the kind that could restore someone from the brink of death. Open up, I ordered, uncorking one. Arthur made a vague, uncooperative sound. Ugh. Seriously? His body had zero strength left, so I had to tilt his head, carefully pressing the vial to his lips and making sure he actually drank it. One potion. Then another. Then another. Each one working its way through his broken body as my magic continued to mend the worst of the damage. Finally, after what felt like forever, I let out a slow breath. His health had stabilized. I rested my forehead against his, closing my eyes for a moment. Idiot. But at least he was my idiot. I turned my gaze to the violet-haired girl approaching, and the moment my eyes landed on her, she flinched. Good. I narrowed my eyes. She looked exhausted, worn down, unsteady on her feet. Recoil. Of course. Arthur hadn't been the only one to push himself past reason. I sighed and reached into my ring, pulling out another potion. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it to her. Here, I said. Drink it. You took some recoil, didn't you? She caught it, nodding slightly before uncorking it and drinking. I barely paid her any more attention, shifting my focus back to the man slumped against me, his head resting against my chest. Arthur. I traced my fingers through his hair absent-mindedly, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. His body had finally stopped trembling, his mana stabilizing under my constant healing. I leaned down and pressed a soft kiss against his forehead. Arthur, I murmured, my lips curling into a slow smile. Now, what type of cag house should I build for us? Arthur made a tired noise, barely lifting his head. Ratch? I'm drowsy. I pulled him closer. Shoo, it's all right. I'm here. He didn't argue. He didn't push me away. For the first time, Arthur Nightingale, cunning, untouchable, infuriating Arthur, was completely defenseless. And trusting. I wasn't letting go of this. The sounds of battle still rumbled in the distance. The clash of steel, the sharp pulses of astral energy. The knight captain and the bishop were still locked in combat, though the tempo had slowed. I glanced toward the fight, assessing. The bishop was stronger, no doubt about that, but he wasn't at full strength. He had spent too much fighting Arthur. My fingers absent-mindedly traced over Arthur's wrist, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin. Arthur couldn't have done this much damage on his own. I frowned slightly. Did he fight Carrie too? The other ascendant ranker in this city. That would explain a lot. I exhaled slowly, stroking Arthur's hair as he drifted further into unconsciousness. Idiot, I whispered, but my arms tightened around him all the same. Even though he was an idiot who put himself in danger, I was the bigger idiot who loved him. Chapter 269. I woke up to warmth. Not the harsh, burning kind of warmth that came from battle or overexertion, but something softer. Plush blankets, gentle lighting, the faintest scent of lavender lingering in the air. The mattress beneath me was almost too comfortable, like sinking into clouds, and for a brief moment, my mind refused to function beyond acknowledging the simple fact that I was here, wherever here was. My body felt heavy, tired in a way that didn't just come from lack of rest but from complete depletion. Every muscle ached with that deep, stubborn exhaustion that refused to fade, the kind that made even the thought of movement seem like an impossible task. I exhaled slowly, blinking up at the ceiling. White, ornate, familiar yet not. I turned my head slightly, taking in my surroundings. A large, well-furnished bedroom. The lighting was soft, golden. Heavy curtains blocked out the windows, but I could tell it was morning. Something felt off. I shifted, attempting to sit up, only to feel a sharp resistance. Clink. I froze. Slowly, I looked down. My wrists, cuffed. Thick, enchanted cuffs bound my hands together, the faint glow of a suppression rune humming against my skin. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind taking an extra second to process why I was bound like some criminal before I realized. Someone was next to me, curled up at my side, completely dead to the world, was Rachel. Her golden hair spilled across the pillow, one hand lightly gripping my sleeve, her expression softer in sleep than I had ever seen it. She was still in her usual clothes, though slightly wrinkled, as if she had been here far longer than she was supposed to be. For a moment, I simply looked at her. Then I shifted slightly. Big mistake. The moment I moved, she stirred, her brows furrowing, her fingers tightening around my sleeve as if she knew I was trying to escape. Then, in the space of a breath, her eyes snapped open. I barely had time to register the shock flashing across her face before she lunged, throwing her arms around me in a hug so tight it knocked the air from my lungs. Arthur! I stiffened, caught completely off guard. She buried her face against my shoulder, gripping me like I might disappear if she let go. You idiot! You absolute! Do you have any idea? I blinked. Rachel! Her grip tightened. You were in a coma for a month. I froze. What? I managed to calm her down. No small feat, considering she was clinging to me like a drowning woman to driftwood. Despite the awkwardness of the cuffs restricting my movement, I somehow managed to pat her head. It wasn't easy, but after some grumbling, mostly from her, Rachel finally took a deep breath, pulling herself together enough to explain everything. The bishop had escaped. Not just that, the cult behind the Red Knot Guild hadn't been exposed. Which meant, the Red Chalice cult wasn't found. I clenched my fists, a slow, simmering frustration building inside me. I had wanted proof. Cold, undeniable evidence that would expose their existence. But I had failed. I took a breath, pushing down the frustration. There would be time to dwell on it later. What about Reka? I asked. Is she? Rachel's sapphire eyes narrowed. And then, I was suddenly on my back again, Rachel straddling me, her hands firmly planted on my chest. I blinked. She tilted her head, her lips curling into something that looked like a smile, but her eyes were most definitely not smiling. The first thing you ask about other than your mission is Reka? She murmured. I paused. Well, I was just worried. No. We stared at each other. A long, charged silence. And what? I said slowly, testing the cuffs again. Are these? Rachel blushed. And then, to my growing horror, she twirled her hair. I narrowed my eyes. Stop acting coy. She looked away, suddenly very interested in the ceiling. I captured you. I stared. What am I? A certain pocket monster? I missed you so much. Rachel suddenly threw herself onto me, burying her face into my neck. And I saved you, so I deserve a reward. I stared at the ceiling, vaguely wondering if I was still in a coma. What the hell? Then, in the back of my mind, I heard her. You finally woke up, Luna's voice murmured. Luna? I said, a little desperately. Do you have any idea what's going on? Of course. Oh, thank God. Explain then. Never in my immortal life, Luna interrupted. Have I seen something like this, Arthur? What in the stars did you do to the future saintess of the world? I didn't do anything, I protested. Shut up, Luna growled in my mind, her usually serene voice dripping with absolute betrayal. I can't believe this. To see the most beautiful soul in the world corrupted like this. If there was a God worth praying to, I would be on my knees right now. I closed my eyes, inhaling. Maybe if I opened them again, reality would have fixed itself. I tried. Didn't. Instead, I found Rachel leaning in too close. Her sapphire eyes shimmered with something far too amused for my comfort. Do you not like them? She asked, tilting her head. Of course not. Take them off. She pouted. It was cute, objectively, but unfortunately for her, I had built up a resistance to this kind of nonsense. With a sigh that sounded way too exaggerated for someone who had just illegally detained me, she uncuffed my wrists. I flexed my hands, finally free, exhaling as the weight of the suppression runes faded. Sorry, Rachel murmured. I blinked. She wasn't pouting now. There was no teasing lilt to her voice, no playful smirk. She looked almost guilty. I'm sorry, she repeated, softer this time. So don't hate me, okay? I stared at her for a moment. I couldn't hate you for this, I said honestly. Rachel froze. Then, in the blink of an eye, her mood flipped back to pure joy. Her entire face lit up, eyes gleaming like I had just handed her the moon on a silver platter. Then I need to say sorry properly, she stammered. I barely had time to process what that meant before she straightened, cleared her throat, and proudly announced, You can touch me. A pause. A long, dangerous pause. She pointed just below her chin, tapping her skin lightly. Here. No. Why? She whined, throwing her hands up like I had just denied her a once-in-a-lifetime wish. I mean, you like me. And isn't it desirable? I sighed, placing my hands firmly on her shoulders. Rachel, I said, looking her straight in the eyes. I like you the same way I like the 3 other girls. But there's an order to this. Her pout deepened. Am I not first? Not that kind of order, I muttered, rubbing my temples. Luna let out something between a strangled sigh and a groan of absolute despair. This is it, Luna muttered, voice dripping with weary resignation. This is how my faith in humanity dies. How about we go back to that plan of seducing every powerful woman? Luna, think about it, she continued, completely ignoring me. You even managed to turn a saintess into, what do you call it? Yandra. I'm sure normal girls would be even easier to corrupt. You are so not helpful. Meanwhile, in the real world, Rachel was still sitting in my lap, fidgeting. And that was dangerous. Not because she looked shy, no, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that I knew her, and Rachel Creighton wasn't the type to fidget. If she was acting nervous, it was either a prelude to something ridiculous, or she was about to drop information that would make my life significantly worse. Arthur? She murmured, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress. I just want you so badly, but I don't want to annoy you. I opened my mouth, closed it, thought about saying something rational, decided against it. She pressed on. I'm sorry for cuffing you. Her. I'm sorry for keeping you in the Creighton estate for a month. I blinked. A month? Anne? She hesitated, glancing away. Only allowing your family to visit you. My brain stalled. What? What about others? Rachel twiddled her fingers, suddenly very interested in the embroidery on her sleeve. Well, she started, drawing out the word like she was about to admit to accidentally breaking a vase, not imprisoning me for an entire month. They tried to visit, she muttered. There was a beat of silence. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temple with my now uncuffed hands. Rachel, I said slowly, what exactly did you do? She still refused to meet my eyes. I groaned. Chapter 270. I looked at Rachel and analyzed her. Her personality was currently a bit broken. By broken I meant way not like usual. She was usually composed, intelligent, and saintly. The Rachel I knew carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Her words were measured, her actions deliberate, her compassion genuine but never overwhelming. She had always been the steady one, the voice of reason when everything else descended into chaos. Not like this Rachel, fidgeting, emotional, desperate for validation, was almost a stranger wearing a familiar face. The dissonance was jarring, like hearing a beloved song played in the wrong key. What happened? I wondered. She needs validation from you, Luna said, her voice unusually solemn. For some reason, her proof of originality is revolving around you and you alone. I frowned, studying Rachel's face more carefully. Beneath the veneer of childish possessiveness, I could see something darker, a shadow of fear that didn't belong there. Her eyes, normally clear and steady, held a feverish desperation that made my chest tighten uncomfortably. Rachel, I began, choosing my words with care. When exactly did I fall into a coma? She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. Right after the battle with Bishop Vale. You collapsed as soon as I started healing you. And you've been here the entire time? Something flashed across her expression. Guilt, perhaps, or defensiveness. Someone had to make sure you were safe. For an entire month? I pressed not unkindly. Rachel's fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress, her knuckles whitening. The bishop is still out there, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And the cult? They might have tried to finish what they started. There was more to it than that. I could tell from the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Rachel wasn't just protecting me from external threats. She was guarding against something else entirely. Rachel, I said softly, what aren't you telling me? The silence stretched between us, taut and fragile. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, a gentle rhythm that only emphasized the tension in the room. Finally, she exhaled, a shaky breath that seemed to deflate her. You almost died, she whispered. Not just injured, not just unconscious. You were dying, Arthur. Her voice cracked on my name, and I saw the first glimmer of tears in her eyes. Your body was rejecting itself. Whatever you did during that battle, using Rekha's gift, pushing yourself beyond your limits, it tore you apart from the inside. Your mana channels were shredded, your organs failing one by one. She looked up at me then, and the raw pain in her eyes hit me like a physical blow. I healed you, she continued, her voice steadying slightly. I poured everything I had into keeping you alive. But it wasn't enough. You wouldn't wake up, and I couldn't figure out why. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. The royal physicians said there was nothing more to be done, that you might never wake up, that your mind had retreated too far to be reached. Understanding began to dawn, a cold realization that sank into my bones. So you stayed, I murmured. Rachel nodded, a tear finally escaping to trace a silver path down her cheek. I stayed. I channeled my gift into you every day, hour after hour, trying to reach whatever part of you was still fighting. I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I just loved you enough. She trailed off, her composure finally crumbling. Tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with the force of emotions too long suppressed. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Every day that passed, it felt like I was losing more of you, and I couldn't bear the thought of a world without you in it. Something twisted in my chest, a complicated tangle of guilt, affection, and realization. This wasn't just about possessiveness or jealousy. This was about fear, raw primal fear of loss. I reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing my hand over hers. Rachel, I said quietly, look at me. She raised her head, tears still streaming down her face, her usual composure nowhere to be found. I'm here, I told her. I'm awake. Whatever you did, it worked. You're exhausted, I said, Not a question but a statement of fact. Physically, mentally, emotionally. You've been pouring your gift into me for weeks, with no rest, no reprieve. She nodded minutely, as if admitting weakness was still difficult despite everything. Her voice cracked again, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I can't lose you, Arthur. I just can't. Everyone else sees the prodigy, the strategist, the genius with limitless potential. But I see you, and the thought of a world without you in it's unbearable. Something shifted inside me then, a quiet realization that had perhaps been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. I reached out, gently taking her face in my hands, my thumbs brushing away her tears. Rachel, I said softly, I'm not going anywhere. Her breath hitched, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. I can't promise I won't get hurt again, I continued, holding her gaze steadily. I can't promise that everything will be safe or easy, but I can promise you this. I want you in my life, not just as a healer, not just as a friend, as someone essential to me. I could feel Luna's surprise rippling through our connection, but I ignored it, focusing solely on the woman before me. I've been a fool, I admitted. So focused on the big picture, on strategies and plans and long-term goals, that I never properly acknowledged what was right in front of me. What you mean to me? Rachel went very still, her tears suddenly frozen on her cheeks. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying that I care for you, Rachel, deeply. I'm saying that when I look at my future, I can't imagine it without you there. It wasn't an empty declaration. The words came from a place of genuine realization, of pieces finally falling into place. Rachel had always been there, steady and unwavering. She had seen me at my worst and still chosen to stay, not because of what I could do, but because of who I was. I need you, I said simply. Not just your gift, not just your abilities. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. The way you see the world, the way you face challenges. All of it. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different. The release of tension rather than the grip of fear. I've been so afraid, she admitted, her voice steadying slightly. Watching you with Reka, with the princesses, I've been terrified that there wouldn't be room for me, that I'd be left behind. Never, I said firmly. You will always have a place with me, Rachel. Always. She drew in a shaky breath, then another, steadier one. Something in her eyes began to clear, the feverish desperation giving way to something more centered, more like the Rachel I knew. I'm sorry, she said, a hint of her old composure returning, for how I've been acting, for the restraints. A flash of embarrassment crossed her face. I don't know what came over me. Magical exhaustion, emotional trauma, and a month of keeping someone alive through sheer force of will, I suggested dryly. I think you're entitled to a little irrationality. A small, tentative smile curved her lips, the first genuine one I'd seen since waking. Still, it wasn't like me. No, I agreed. But the core of it was very much you, Rachel. The devotion, the determination, the refusal to give up on someone you care about. Those are all quintessentially Rachel Creighton. She laughed softly, the sound a little watery but real. You always see the best in me. I see all of you, I corrected. The good, the challenging, the complicated. And I value all of it. Her expression softened, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. She wasn't completely